And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, will my aging neighbor be able to stay on topic long enough to learn all about her debilitating arthritis? And with COVID cases on the decline everywhere, could I reuse all these paper masks for a neighborhood origami party? And now, the podcast host who never has time for origami unless he's in a public restroom stall, Pete Dominic!
You know, that is true. I do like to keep all of my crafting exclusive to public restroom stalls. I carry a little bag, a handbag around just in case. Sometimes I'll have yarn, I'll do some knitting, and, of course, origami. Hello and welcome to Stand Up. Thank you very much, Pete Co. As always, I've got an excellent show for you planned. I've got two great guests. Aaron David Miller on foreign policy and the president's speech last night, State of the Union, and Christine Romans, chief business correspondent and co-anchor of Early Start on CNN. Our old friend Christine Romans talked to us about economics and how the war is affecting that and much, much more. So much to discuss with you. Hey, is COVID over? Is the pandemic over? It feels really over. I don't know. I know that's probably offensive if I say that and you get upset and annoyed by it. I want to hear from you. Let me know what you think. Those are the voices I'd like to hear from. It is Thursday here on the show, by the way, which means we hang out on Thursday nights, 8 p.m. East. If you're a stand-up subscriber, you should be getting an email each and every day. And it should have a nature photo taken by a listener and a description of the show, when the interviews start, links, and more. About to get a much better, I think, that daily email. I got something up my sleeve starting next week. We'll see what happens and how consistent I can be with it. But you should also get a link to the Hangout, a Zoom link to the Hangout if you're a subscriber. If you're not, what are you doing? Hey, what are you waiting for? Talking to you. Quit dragging your feet. Go to standupwithpete.com. Don't drag your feet. Go to standupwithpete.com and sign up right now for a paid subscription, and you can be hanging out with us and anytime on the Discord platform. Okay, two great guests, lots to talk about. I hope you're okay. Let's get into it, shall we? It's time for The Last 24. All right, well, the top story for the week continues to be, of course, Vladimir Putin's insane invasion into Ukraine. And guess what? I've got all of the headlines you could possibly ask for and also some really good audio. But what is being called a thumping defeat for Russia at the UN General Assembly and what is being called a historic vote denouncing Russia over Ukraine invasion. United Nations General Assembly overwhelmingly voted to reprimand Russia for invading Ukraine, demanded that Moscow stop fighting, withdraw its military forces, an action that aims to diplomatically isolate at the world body. The resolution, supported by 141 of the Assembly's 193 members, passed a rare emergency session called by the UN Security Council while Ukrainian forces battled to defend the port of Kherson, which is the first major city that has been lost as bombing of civilian targets has intensified. Russian troops seized the important city, making it the first to be overcome since the invasion began. 300,000 people. It'll allow Russia to control more of Ukraine's southern coastline and then push west. More than 1 million people have fled Ukraine since the invasion began last week, the head of the United Nations Refugee Agency has said. Russia published its first casualty figures in Ukraine, admitting 498 soldiers were killed and a further 1,500 were injured. They were saying, Ukrainian outlets were saying 6,000 Russian soldiers have died, and there is no possible way of that. That would be 3 times more deaths, Russian military deaths, in a week than were the entire 20-year war in Afghanistan for American soldiers. It's just, I think you would just see bodies everywhere. I'm having a very hard time with that, but nobody is actually saying that's an official source. Most people calling it propaganda. The Russia stock market will remain closed tomorrow for today for the 4th day in a row. Nearly 600 protesters were arrested in Russia yesterday. And the World Bank halted all projects in Russia and Belarus. So just some of the headlines, so many more, as you can imagine. But let's get to some of the audio. First, here's a translation of the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky.
We've hardly slept for 7 nights. Or we sleep, but anxiously. My dears, the time will come when we'll be able to sleep. But it'll be after the war, after the victory, in a peaceful country, as we need.
Wow. Yeah, there's a lot more of that. He is still out there leading his country, and the courage that it takes is just, I mean, this guy's going to go down in history in such an important way, and hopefully there'll be some miracle where he survives. Also, I thought this is really interesting. I was watching this yesterday while I was planting my seedlings. I saw this guy talking on MSNBC's Deadline White House, is that it? Nicole Wallace. His name is Igor Novikov, and he's a former advisor to the Ukrainian president. He's actually still in Ukraine there with his family, and he describes Ukraine as a John Wick of the country, incredibly peaceful. But if you mess with us, that's a whole other story. You got to hear just about a minute of this guy. He gave like a very long interview on MSNBC, but I loved it.
Even if we didn't have javelins, like even if Russia acted more professionally in the field, there's that too. I mean, Russians are just appalling in the military sense. But like, even if that didn't happen, you'd still have like people with Molotov cocktails. You'd have saboteurs attacking them at night, and sooner or later, it would have taken later, and we might have lost a lot more civilian lives. But you know, that'd be running scared. I mean, I guarantee you that. Look, we are, the best analogy would be we are a John Wick of a country. So, you know, we're incredibly peaceful, and we go about our daily lives, you know, brag about like sports achievements and everything. But then, like, if you mess with us, that's a whole other story. And that's what you're seeing now.
Yeah, that whole interview was fascinating to watch. They talked for like 20 minutes. Really great guest who speaks excellent English, obviously. All right, so here's the sound. This is what it sounded like yesterday at that UN vote that I mentioned at the UN General Assembly. He cuts out for a second, but he said 141 countries.
The result of the vote is as follows. In favor, 41, against 5, abstentions 35. Draft resolution A/ES/11/L1 is adopted.
All right, that's a lot of slashes. Well done to the announcer there. Here is the Secretary of State of the United States of America, Anthony Blinken, weighing in on what he thinks of those 5 countries and that very lopsided, unprecedented vote.
For the small number that voted against, Belarus, the DPRK, Eritrea, Syria, as well as, of course, Russia. As Groucho Marx once sort of said, this is not very much a club that I would want to be a member of.
All right. Yeah, you don't want to be a member of that club, huh? Well, here's a Ukrainian ambassador to the UN. His name is Sergei Kislitsia. Kislitsia. I think I nailed it. How about it, TR? Did I get the pronunciation right? He said he was almost crying while watching President Biden's State of the Union address.
I saw my colleague, Ambassador of Ukraine, on a balcony. She was almost crying. I was watching the address by Biden in the comfort of my office, and I was almost crying. But those are not the emotions that matter. That's the resolution, the resolute posture of the American people, not just by the politicians in the Senate, by the American people that matters. The spirit of freedom and liberty is genetically in the blood of Ukrainians and Americans, of the British, of the Poles, of all freedom-loving nations on this planet. So the speech was very well received, and I'm sure that the nature of this country is that every single word of President Biden will be followed by specific actions of his government and by specific actions of the members of the U.S. Congress.
Well, at the Monterey Open tennis tournament, there was a Ukrainian versus a Russian in women's tennis, and the Ukrainian tennis star Elina Svitolina, she won. She defeated the Russian Anastasia Potapova at the Monterey Open last night, 2 nights ago, and here she is saying she's going to give the money to the army. These people are like John Wick. Listen to her.
And in general, I was just focused. I was on the mission for my country. Yes, it's a very, very special event, this one for me. All the prize money that I'm going to earn here is going to the Ukrainian army, so thank you so much for the support.
Gonna give the prize money to the army. Wow. Pretty impressive. Pretty impressive moment right there at the Monterey Open. And now here is a different Russian tennis star who apparently has been continuing to speak out against Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Her name is Anastasia Pavlyuchenkova.
I'm not a politician. I'm just a woman who plays tennis professionally. So I don't know much about it, but I just try to speak out. I just try to make my point. I just don't want violence. All we want right now, our hearts are broken. We just want peace and love and stop the violence.
All right. Well, unfortunately, I don't think that's going to come anytime soon, but keep up the outspoken voices from Russians as well. Now, here is the chief rabbi of Ukraine. He's actually here in the U.S. and near where I live in Rockland County. His name is Yaakov Bleich, Rabbi Yaakov Bleich. And here he is talking about Putin, the Russians bombing the Babyn Yar Holocaust Memorial Center in Ukraine. They bombed a Holocaust Memorial Center.
Suddenly, a site where tens of thousands of Jews were murdered once in 1941. Then their memory was murdered again by the Soviet regime, not giving them a chance for any memory from 1945 until 1991. And 1991, when Ukraine became independent, we started to build a memorial to these people. For 30 years, we're trying to give them what they should have had, which is the proper memory. And then this fellow who says he's coming to fight the neo-fascists in Ukraine comes and bombs that place, which is the memorial to the Jews who were killed by the fascists. This is one of the most symbolic and terrible feelings that I've had from the beginning of this week of harrowing and frightening experiences and watching, Ukraine, a maniac coming to destroy the place. One of the most frightening and harrowing things is this, because it reawakens, the images of the Holocaust. I think it's symbolic, honestly, that all of the never again talk has to become never again action. That's what I think of it.
All right. Well done by the rabbi. And I should probably try to get an interview with him. Okay, well, here is President Biden yesterday answered a couple of questions on his way to, I guess, his chopper, the helicopter, Marine One that was out there. And he's wearing the sunglasses. And one of the questions was about President Zelensky.
Mr. President, how worried are you about President Zelensky? And do you think he should stay in Ukraine, or do you think he should try to leave?
I think it's his judgment to make, and we're doing everything we can to help him.
Oh man, missed opportunity in my opinion. Seriously, I think President Biden should have pulled off the Ray-Bans and said, "Well, let me look into the camera here, give a message to President Zelensky," and then said something about, "I want to tell you, we got your back. We think what you're doing is so brave, so courageous," and something like that. I wish you would have said a message to Zelensky in that moment, but he didn't take advantage of that opportunity. But a right-wing Christian Catholic reporter did take advantage of his opportunity to get in front of the president. He's often there in the White House briefing room, annoying Jen Psaki, asking questions about abortion and Joe Biden, and always asking, how could a Catholic be supportive of abortion? Anyway, he somehow snuck up on the president yesterday and asked him that question to his face. President Biden, a bit flustered and surprised with such a ridiculous question to be asked while he's on his way to the helicopter. But nonetheless, this dogged anti-abortion reporter snuck it in.
You support Roe v. Wade as a Catholic. Why do you support abortion as a Catholic?
I tell you what, I I don't want to get in a debate with you on theology, but well, anyway, I'm not going to make a judgment for other people.
All right, he punches out. I'm not going to make a judgment for other people. That's all he really obviously needed to say there, but he handled it and got on his way and onto the helicopter. All right, what else do I have here for you? Ron DeSantis got a lot of attention yesterday because he was at the University of South Florida I don't know what he was doing there, but he had a whole bunch of students behind him, and a bunch of the students apparently had masks on, and he went in there and attacked them and yelled at them for wearing the masks. It was pretty ridiculous. If you didn't hear it, I don't even want to play it for you. But here he is for some reason, throwing France under the bus as it relates to the invasion in Ukraine. This guy really he doesn't impress me. I'm not sure why everybody acts like he's impressive. Ron DeSantis, I feel like he's not good at this, but nonetheless, here's a quick clip of him embarrassing himself.
A lot of other places around the world, they just fold the minute there's any type of adversity. I mean, can you imagine if he went into France? Would they do anything to put up a fight? Probably not. And so those folks, are stepping up. But there's a lot of problems, I think, between now and then. And I think, unfortunately, it's going to end up very, very ugly over the next weeks and months.
Oh, man, what a dick. Who says such a thing? A lot of other places around the world would have just folded in the face of adversity. That's actually us. That's a lot of us, for sure. I mean, speaking of which, this guy's so upset about having to wear a piece of cloth on your face so as to not get yourself and others sick. And that's the hardest thing that we have to face, according to him. I mean, it really is ridiculous. He's worried about kids having their feelings hurt by learning about homosexuality or black history. Just so absurd. But all right, well, Jon Stewart back on Capitol Hill advocating for veterans and veterans health care in this case. And he sounded off on reports that Republican Congressman Mike Bost, B-O-S-T, of Illinois, is going to attempt to substitute 5 years of health care for comprehensive veteran benefits. He didn't like that. Here he is back on the Hill advocating for veterans. I thought this was good.
All these veteran service organizations and all these active military members have come together with Chairman Takano and Speaker Pelosi and the President of the United States, and they have designed a bill that will comprehensively address the urgent need in the veterans community. And Ranking Member Boss' amendment is going to say, damn, that's good work. So why don't we just switch that out for 5 more years of health care? We good? Thanks, guys. We're good. Fuck that. Not happening. They get what they deserve, the comprehensive bill that addresses the urgent need in their community.
Yes, good job, Jon Stewart. Good for him. Using his celebrity, his ability to communicate, and the way that he does so uniquely to attract attention and cameras at a press conference. And he also went on TV and talked about it with the morning show people. So good for him. I think that's important. I wish more big-time celebrities would do it, and I give him credit. I definitely do. All right, well, that's all the audio I have found for you that I had time to grab. You can always send me things. I appreciate it. DM them to me on Twitter. Email them to me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. Send me any of the audio that you're hearing from the day, and I'll try to get it on the show within the next 24 hours. How about that? How about that? I'll work with you anytime. Thank you. All right, now it's time to get to the rest of the headlines in the news feed, in the news zeitgeist, as I pay attention to it on and off all day like an IV drip. Don't worry. I take my breaks and then I punch in, I punch back out. But here are the rest of the headlines that I think are important or undercovered, because I got to dump them somewhere. Might as well leave them here on the news dump. Pete Co., hit it.
Charlie bowling charity, but he started in a slump. No doubt the horse was robbed on today's news dump.
All right, that is the weirdest story. I still don't really understand it, but it was a fundraiser, a bowling fundraiser, and the sheriff was one of the competitors, and the other competitor apparently was a mini horse. Charlie the mini horse also bowled. I don't know. This story is Very suspect. It's from Big Rapids, Michigan, if you want to learn more about it. The Pioneer newspaper, I think it's called. All right, well, let's get to some more important stories. National Safety Council Wednesday estimated that traffic fatalities in the U.S. increased 9% 2021, and it's up to 46,020 people who died of traffic fatalities. Distracted driving, not wearing seatbelts. Government, U.S. Department of Transportation has responded with a plan calling for safer vehicles, safer roads, safer speeds, as well as revamped care for those involved in a crash to inevitably reach zero traffic fatalities, among other items, according to the U.S. Department of Transportation. Some people think self-driving cars will lead to a lot fewer fatalities. Other people don't think that. I don't know. All right, well, here's a good study. Children who live and study in greener places are less stressed, according to this study. The results show that the greater exposure to vegetation that a child has, the lower level of oxidative stress is found, and the association was observed regardless of the child's physical activity. I don't know how good that study is from the Barcelona Institute for Global Health, but I do like it. Any study that studies children spent in outdoor green spaces is good to me. That's why I feel so bad I see those kids hiding in the subways in Ukraine, and it's just awful because they're not in natural areas around daylight and vegetation. How about this one? Amazon is closing their physical bookstores and shops. I guess that didn't work. I mean, retail had all-time records, but the actual brick-and-mortar Amazon stores, they didn't make it. And they want to focus more on their Whole Foods and their Amazon Fresh brands, apparently. So their physical retail stores that they had under that brand are going bye-bye. Also, here's an interesting investigation being launched by a bipartisan coalition of attorneys general. I said it right. They're investigating TikTok's impact on the well-being of children. I can tell you, according to me, as a dad, it's terrible. It's terrible impact. I like the idea that they learn how to edit videos. I like that there's a creative component to it, but it's just way too much of a distraction if you're making the videos or watching the videos. The investigation is going to look at the harm that the app may cause young people and what TikTok knows about those harmful effects. So plenty to talk about, and I support that investigation. The Senate has passed something. The United States Senate passed something. Aruga. It's the cybersecurity bill amid fears of Russian cyber attacks, apparently. It's called the Strengthening American Cybersecurity Act, package of 3 bills. And so if you want to learn more about that. And guess what? Trump's border wall apparently is not that good. A new report out saying that it's been breached thousands of times by smugglers. Trump's border wall, apparently. Yeah, so investigation by the Washington Post found that Customs and Border Protection spent $2.6 million to repair 3,272 such breaches in the time period between 19 and 2021. Oh, man. Anything he touches dies. January 6th rioter who pled guilty has died by suicide ahead of his sentencing. A Pennsylvania man last year pleaded guilty to multiple charges in connection with the January 6th Capitol attack, killed himself last week while awaiting trial. Apparently, China asked Russia to delay the invasion until the end of the Olympics. Hey, could you guys not start a war until the Olympics are over? Thanks, we got your back. We'll find a way to repay you, I'm sure. And now with Carnival over, New Orleans is dropping their COVID-19 mandates, and a judge has halted Texas's efforts to probe gender-affirming care for trans children, which I think is another really important headline to mention. And those are all of the headlines I've got for you in the news dump section. It's now time, ladies and gentlemen, to move on to the guest section, the interviews, the guest segments, whatever you want to call them. I've got 2 great guests joining me on the show today. Aaron David Miller is coming up. Always a great conversation with him. But before that, I caught up with Christine Romans yesterday morning when she got done with her show on CNN, which airs every morning from 4 to 6 a.m. Eastern. She's the co-anchor of CNN's Early Start. She's their chief business correspondent. She's been a longtime regular guest of mine. We talk about business headlines, finance, economics, and the like. She called me yesterday morning, and here is our conversation. I give you a little of the behind the scenes at the top, too. Hello.
Hi, it's Romans.
Romans!
Is this okay?
This is perfect.
I'm a minute late, sorry.
You know what? Let's cancel it. Great to hear your voice.
You too. How are you?
I'm doing really well.
Good. You want to do it on the phone, or you want me to call in as something else?
No, this worked. This actually sounds pretty good.
Okay, good.
Does this work for you?
Yeah, it works for me. I have a hit at like a little after 9:30, so.
All right, awesome. Well, here we go then. All right, I have Christine Romans on the phone, and she is just out of the studio, away from the desk at CNN. She's got to go back in there. She's fitting me and us in. Thank you very much for calling me.
Anytime, Pete, anytime.
You are doing excellent reporting, as always, on all things, including, as always, the chief business correspondent, which I love to talk to you about stuff there. So let's just start. I just wanted to ask your take on the State of the Union and what President Biden said in terms of touting his economic record and maybe what he left out. What are your thoughts on the speech last night, which I'm sure you covered this morning on CNN?
Yeah, and I was looking through the sort of the breakdown of the time, and he spent more time talking about the economy than anything else. But, he started the speech talking about Russia and Ukraine, and I think that was appropriate. The economy piece of it is tough for him because people feel pretty crappy because of COVID, because of what we've lived through, because of, as the president said, the million people who aren't sitting at the table, with their families listening to the State of the Union or having their everyday life because of the mass deaths we've gone through because of the pandemic. And then you've got an economy that roars back, but it brings with it biting inflation. And so that's what people feel. They feel this COVID exhaustion, and they feel the bite of, higher price to fill up a gas tank. And then just when we're on the verge of talking about the relief of masking restrictions being dropped and schools really getting back to normal, you have an invasion, from Russia. So the timing of is just, for a sitting president, it's just remarkable when you think of all those challenges.
Yeah, the hits keep coming, and obviously the price increases on everything. But I guess the most important one is gas, which of course you're keeping track of, and the invasion of Ukraine has a huge effect on that for a number of reasons that people have heard about. But I guess I was reading something this morning, I think from Bloomberg. It's like war has a shock on markets, and then often markets kind of return to normal. I wonder if that means that's true of the price of gas at the pump, other things. What are your thoughts on where we're at right now?
So there's some valuable context on gas prices. The record high gas price was in 2008, and it was $4.10 and 3/100 of a gallon. So $4.10 a gallon was the record in 2008. My friend Patrick DeHaan at Gas Buddy says you would have to have $5.25 today to match that record. That's adjusting for inflation. So we're not quite at records. We're at we're near nominal records, or will be. We're starting to hit in different parts of the country $4 a nationwide average. But you could see things maybe start to peak out this summer, and maybe you don't actually match that inflation adjusted, topping $5 a gallon. A lot of that depends on what happens with OPEC Plus. Those are the cartel of oil producers who are meeting today. Will they, led by Saudi Arabia, pump more oil because of the Russian distraction? I'm sure every diplomat in the world is trying to encourage them to do so. Not clear that they will or even want to. A lot happens of what happens with this Russian invasion. You're right, though. When I look at charts, stock market charts, there's always an initial move and a shock because of an invasion. Then it shakes out. However, we haven't seen an invasion of a member of the United Nations attacking another member of the United Nations and looking, with raining down bombs on civilians, as all of our reporting shows. That hasn't happened since World War II. So I don't know how much precedent we can put in any of the historical data. We're kind of in uncharted territory here.
What do you have to say about wheat markets? I'm hearing people talk about wheat. You have covered all kinds of commodities, and obviously you're an Iowa girl. You have an interest in this.
Yeah.
Why are people talking about wheat and the price of it?
Because the two biggest producers are Ukraine and Russia. And the morning of the invasion, several days ago, when this whole thing started, in Paris, wheat futures were up 15% to record highs. I'm looking right now at wheat futures in the Chicago markets up another 4 or 5% here. You're going to see there's uncertainty. Uncertainty drives prices higher usually, or uncertainty drives stock prices lower, commodity prices higher, and that's what we're seeing. So the commodity story, really important, Pete. This, for anybody sitting back and saying, why do we care about what's happening in Ukraine? First of all, it's heartless to say that. Second of all, this is something you're going to feel at the gas station, at the grocery store, in interest rates, how the Fed has to calibrate for the global inflation threat and the inflation threat at home. All of this goes together. I mean, and when I look at the Russian economy, I mean, at this point, if the hits keep coming for the Russian economy, Greg Valliere says a depression is coming. Certainly a recession is coming. Most economists think a 5% contraction in the Russian economy. And that's not really that surprising. What is so striking to me is that Vladimir Putin invaded a democratic neighbor with the West telling him not to, and he knew he was going to crash his stock market and probably undermine his ruble, and he did it anyway. Yeah. So that's what we're dealing with. Yeah.
I think you asked that on Twitter, and it's a really important question, but I don't know. What do I know? But I feel like he thought he was going to get away with it. He thought he had enough money stored up. He did not think that the world would react the way it did. I mean, and given what happened in 2014 in Crimea, I mean, that's kind of... It took a year for sanctions after that. It took a year for the West to get together the package of sanctions. In 2 days, the West, the EU, the US, the UK, and their allies have managed to do in 2 days, they have managed to wall off 8 years of Vladimir Putin's building of a fortress balance sheet in 2 days, which is remarkable. I mean, I've never seen the West come together. And our reporting and other reporting from other folks too is that sort of the bureaucrats, the technocrats, the people behind the scenes at finance ministries and treasury departments around the world, they've been looking at the intelligence for several months, and they have been trying to, pushed by the Biden administration, by the way, trying to get unity on this in case they had to go a shock and awe on financial, warfare. And that's what they've done. I would call it shock and awe financial warfare. Yeah, that's fair. I mean, hard to tell where we go from here, I guess, on such things. But let me come back to the U.S. here and our economy and how people are living. And you mentioned a bunch of different factors that have affected it. But if you look at some of the top headlines, what's happened in the economy, the bounce back, I think, from the last COVID wave, Omicron, or just the past year, has been broken all kinds of records. But the issue, of course, is that the price of things have gone up and how actually people feel, which you mentioned. But the job numbers are way up. So how do you look at this economy, given how on fire it is, and how many different people across the kind of the political spectrum are using that kind of language about how on fire it is?
So the pandemic changed everything, right? Yeah. And one of the biggest things to me is how people feel about their relationship with their employer and their job and the importance of their job. And I'm seeing it was somebody actually in the White House Chief Economic Advisor's office who coined, it's not the great resignation, it's the great upgrade. That people have a little money in their pockets. They've got record high 401k values. They've got record high home equity values. They've just lived through something where, teaching their fifth grader was more important than climbing the ladder at work for all the right reasons in the middle of a pandemic, and they've completely reevaluated everything. So you have the largest gap in history between the jobs that are available and the people who are out there actually looking for a job. And to me, it's remarkable. And Target this week raised some starting salaries to $24, an hour, $24 an hour to work at Target. That's because they're trying to, retain workers. I think the quality of some of these entry-level jobs is by definition going to get better, and they're going to become stepping stone jobs to trying to get into the middle class at least. Whereas for a generation they weren't. Well, I think there's a lot of big changes happening. That when you listen to economists, they're like, "Oh, we have a labor shortage," and "Oh, there's a labor shortage." You listen to companies on their earnings calls, they're like, "We can't find workers. It's going to be wage inflation." I'm like, "Okay, yes, but there's a person who's looking for a job, and they probably have their situation is better today." The bargaining power of labor is a really important story. But you mentioned the Target story. I was going to ask you about wage increases. It's not just Target, but it would seem that the problem isn't necessarily always your hourly wage, but things like healthcare and time off. So this is apparently part, at least Target announced, as
a $300 million investment in pay and benefits. The company said it would expand employee access to health care, and that hourly employees who work an average of at least 25 hours a week would become eligible for a target medical plan. Now, I'm not sure if that's a Band-Aid in a toothbrush or how robust it is, and I think that matters. But isn't that the kind of most important part that people don't talk about? Even if you're making $25 an hour, if you got to miss a day or you get sick or injured, it's not like making $25 an hour, and it can't be that stepping stone you just described.
And what's so great for me is that for capitalists like me, this is the free market at work. If you are a company and you have record profits and your margins are going up and you can't find workers, then you've got to use those profits and you got to shrink those margins a little bit and give a little bit less to shareholders and a little more to invest in your workforce, because that's how you're going to make more money. And that is just capitalism. Everybody wins. And it's been rare in my career that capitalism has worked where everybody wins. And so I'll take this one little moment and relish it, but it is, the war for talent is real. Some companies, I was just looking at a statistic from a human resources advisory firm, that something like 25% of companies are now helping their younger employees pay their student loan bills, or at least a piece of them every month. Now, if you are a young worker in demand in the workforce, I would say young even up to early 40s, are you going to leave your job if you already have something set up with your, some money is taken out for your 401k, and then the company is paying for your $200 a month for your student loan bills? I think you're not going to move. I think you're going to stay right where you are, and you're going to be investing and paying down student loan debt if your company is helping you do that. And more companies are starting to do that because they just don't want the job hoppers. The job hopping was the story of last year, the so-called quitters who weren't quitting for nothing. They were quitting for better jobs and getting 10% pay increases by jumping jobs.
Yeah,
it was like last year.
It was like when people cancel or try to cancel their credit card, their subscription to a magazine, newspaper, or something, a cable, and then they say, "Well, hold on a second before you cancel." And then they get a better deal. That's what people were doing with jobs almost. Like, well, I can go over here and get $20 an hour. I can go over here and get my college loans also paid off. Bye-bye.
Yeah. And there were, I mean, there's so many anecdotal, I would love to do like a whole hour of just the voices of people who, were struggling, busting their butt to work 2 part-time jobs and pay off the student loan bill and trying to think when they could go back to school because they didn't finish the college degree and now they still have the debt and they're working these 2 jobs and all of a sudden, for a long time, retailers and restaurants and stuff, you get a text if you were supposed to come in for your shift, depending on whether it was busy enough. It's like, well, how can you plan for childcare and stuff like that? Now all of that is changing, and they've taken the time. Some people have gone back to school. People have retrained. People have figured out a way. And look, if you are, and this is hard for small businesses, and I get that. It's really hard for small businesses who need to be nimble and who can't pay, $24 an hour. But they're figuring out ways to be more efficient. Figuring out, you can't expect a worker to come and work a third of a shift one week. I mean, people don't want 3 part-time jobs anymore, and I just don't think the American workforce is going to accept that. And so, business, small and big, is going to have to adapt.
Such an important development as a result of a worldwide pandemic, the way that it's changed our lives and how we're living, certainly how we're working. Anything else that you're following along those lines, those trends about how we're changing the way we're living, working, commuting, or bargaining, or going to school, or not working at all? Because I find that well of development a fascinating thing to look at in a study, because it kind of sped up what might have already happened technologically with Zoom and maybe the way that we work in different ways. But it also changed things that maybe would have never changed for a number of reasons, giving us experiences with our families and not working as much. Some of us certainly working more. Anything else that you would draw out of what we've...
The big question, is it temporary or is it permanent? I mean, I think it's permanent. There are plenty of people, though, who think it's temporary, that at some point the money runs out. At some point, you don't have savings anymore. At some point, the housing market will turn, and all of a sudden you don't have all that home equity in your home. That a lot of these people who retired early, many of them in education, by the way, teachers, principals, nurses, doctors, that's where a lot of the early retirements came. People who were like through this. I'm not being respected. I'm not being treated well. I'm in a very dangerous situation, and I have a little money in my house, and I have a little money in my bank account. Will those people have to come back into the workforce, and will it be the same for them, or will it be different? All of these questions are yet to be answered, and I just think it's early days on that front. I mean, thankfully, I feel like we've moved from pandemic to endemic, not officially, but we're moving in that direction for COVID. Very unfortunate to have a global geopolitical crisis and a refugee crisis in Europe, right when we should all be celebrating, working together, celebrating how well we've done over the past 2 years. But, we just move forward. We're just going to move forward.
Have to. What else can you do? What about manufacturing? What about all the questions around how this conflict in Europe affects energy markets in terms of who's producing it, where you're getting it from? Not to mention, President Biden last night and pretty much every American president always talking about, building these things here at home so we don't have to buy them elsewhere. I think the pandemic really laid that bare as well, from PPE to antibiotics. Like, if we're not producing them here, we could be really, really in trouble in the future. But, Biden did have policies and ways to pay for it. Broad approval for these policies, by the way, but whether or not they can get through this Senate matters. But just talk to me a little bit about manufacturing here at home and how we might see certain changes as a result of the pandemic and the war.
So the most important thing, I think, is for semiconductor manufacturing to really wrap up that investment in the U.S. And we've seen that because of the pandemic, but we also have Taiwan is the world's largest manufacturer of semiconductors. If you have some sort of China-Taiwan crisis in the future, which I'm not calling for, but look, what we've seen with Russia and Ukraine right now, never thought would happen. It happened. We need to be protected against that. And there have been big investments that have been made there. I know that there's I think it's Intel investing billions in Ohio. It'll take a couple of years, and we're still going to have disruptions, until that happens. But I am seeing the investments in terms of semiconductor manufacturing. For years, it was just-in-time inventory, right? They have these complex, sprawling global supply chains, and then factories that would assemble everything at the last minute and push it out, and the company made a lot of money. Labor costs were low. You had, generally low oil prices to ship this stuff around the world. Well, that's they're rethinking that now, too. I mean, just-in-time inventory is a real problem if you have a global pandemic or you have a geopolitical confrontation like Ukraine or something were to happen with China and Taiwan. So I think they get it. You're right. Can they do something about it? That's the big question. But again, the capitalist in me says, look, major companies are already making these investments because they see this. They don't want to be caught not being able to fulfill their chip orders for a Ford Motor Company and have to shut down an assembly line because they don't have computer chips. They don't ever want that to happen again.
Yeah, really, all really good points, because whether or not there's government investment or incentive, markets could determine these things and bring some of these jobs back home.
Government can help. Look, government is the not the thing that shouldn't be thinking quarter by quarter and delivering shareholder value and hitting, price targets on Wall Street, right? But government works on 4-year and 2-year and it has its own quarterly report cards too. So government, when used properly, can be an important guide in all of these areas and set the tone. And that's but the pandemic, I think, laid everything bare, and it's very clear you've got to have the strategic manufacturing. It's got to be in your own borders. Or the borders of your very close allies.
All right. Well, my final question for you, I guess, is going to be a you pick. It's a you pick.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to say a few different subjects, and you're going to decide which one you want to share any insights on. I've got here what do I have here. I've got interest rates and monetary policy. I've got the automobile industry. I've got real estate and housing. And I've got a wild card, which is, you could bring up something that I didn't mention.
Oh, let's do real estate and housing.
Okay.
What a wild, I think home prices are up 16% year over year. I mean, it has been 3 or 4 years of double-digit price increases for homes. I look at some of these numbers sometimes, and I just can't believe it. I talked to Barbara Corcoran recently, who's an investing legend. I'm like, okay, what's your advice for a seller? She's like, sell. Get whatever you want. You can do whatever you want. You don't even have to stage it. Just sell. And she's like, if you're a buyer, I'm really sorry. Wait 2 years if you're a buyer. That's exactly what she said. Wait 2 years if you're a buyer. Because it's just so out of whack with supply and demand. in the housing market. I'm ready to renovate my garage just to make more space for my growing meat-eating children who are like.
Hey, that's...
My one kid grew 6 inches last year. My middle schooler, grew 6 inches last year. I need more space, and I can't buy a house someplace else because I can't afford to buy a place.
Right.
You know, you can't afford to move right now. So, the garage is about to get gutted.
I mean, I think that's, by the way, seriously a good idea. We were thinking about doing that for teens when you'd having a teen. It's a teen space. We have friends who did that. Julia's friends did that, and everybody hangs out there. They put a projector up on the screen so you can watch.
That's what we're gonna do.
Games.
That's what I want to do.
I want to help. I do garages. I do garage renovations.
So, and we have really amazing neighbors who have 2 boys the same ages as 2 of my boys, and our backyards have become this flex space for the boys, for all those boys. And so I kind of like the idea that we are the home base for all these wild boys who eat so much food. It's just incredible.
Same.
It's incredible how much food they can eat.
Have your son's friends realized who you are yet, by the way? Has that started to?
I think so. They have this thing called CNN 10, which is something that they show in the schools. And so every now and then there'll be a segment that I'm explaining interest rates or I'm explaining the stock market, that, like packed into the CNN 10 broadcast that they use in schools. And so even when they were really little, like Finn was like maybe 5 or 6 in kindergarten, he was like, "Hey, that's my mom." And I think he was the first time he kind of realized it too. And all the kids are like, "That is not. Her last name is Romans." Like they have their dad's last name, so it's funny. But yes, they do. I think they do.
I want to hear more stories about that at some point. That's got to be fascinating. All right. Well, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your calls. Everybody loves when you join me. It's always great to hear from you, and I hope we can do it again soon. I know you have to go back and go back into your job.
Well, you always ask such good questions, Pete. Like you're a master at this. So I'm willing, and able whenever you'd like to talk.
Talk soon.
Okay, bye.
All right, bye. How about that? Christine Romans, what a kind compliment she gives me at the end. You know what? Aaron David Miller also gave me a kind compliment at the end of our conversation coming up. But thank you, Christine. Please go tweet her at Christine Romans and let her know that you heard her on the show. She's so not flashy and one of these people trying to get Twitter followers and trying to be a big personality like other people at CNN and other networks as well. At Christine Romans. She's just awesome. I love talking to her. All right, so now it's time to get to my second guest on today's show. It's Aaron David Miller, everybody. He is now at the Carnegie the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, which is non-governmental and nonprofit organization. Of course, he's a former State Department analyst, advisor, negotiator, and a CNN global affairs analyst. He is the author of The End of Greatness, Why America Can't Have and Doesn't Want Another Great President. I thought he'd be the perfect person to talk to about both State of the Union and Ukraine being invaded by Russia. Ladies and gentlemen, the great Aaron David Miller on Twitter at Aaron D. Miller 2. Let's do it. All right, there he is, Aaron David Miller. Very happy anytime I get the opportunity to talk to you. And I saw you tweeting along the State of the Union last night. I said, that's who I want to talk to, that guy right there. So thank you. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, things are well. Series I'm moderating at Carnegie is working out really well. We got Ken Burns coming on Monday. Everyone should go to ceip.org. Look for Carnegie Connects. I'll send you the invite.
Yeah, I've been to them, and I've been.
Be a good conversation.
Yeah, those are always great talks. I've attended a couple virtually, and people should go watch you asking the questions. But what is it? Ken Burns? Are you interviewing him?
I am indeed.
About what? I mean, there's so much. What do you focus in on with that guy?
His craft, how he's got 4 documentaries going at the same time, maybe more. His own view of history. You know, he's emerged as America's most prolific and I think best storyteller. And the stories he tells, he says that history is actually high story, right? That's what he does. He introduces stories, and he's done some magnificent ones. Vietnam was extraordinary, Civil War, amazing. He's got a new Ben Franklin one coming out in April, and he's tackling, I understand, his first foreign subject, which will be Leonardo da Vinci.
Oh, wow. That'll be fascinating.
So all that'll be great, yeah. Meanwhile, none of it has much to do with Ukraine, Putin, or Russia.
I want to get to all of that, but I want to know, maybe we could start by talking about what you thought the tone and tenor and commentary from the president at the State of the Union on that issue. How would you describe his handling of that at the top of the speech? It probably wasn't the planned focus for the writers of the State of the Union, but things unfolded fairly quickly and obviously this week. So he had to hit it hard right at the top, I suppose.
He did. I was trying to think of another example where a foreign policy issue or crisis led a president's State of the Union. I think he'd have to go back to Bush 43 in January 2002. I did actually, after I asserted that was probably the last time foreign policy led 15 minutes of a president's speech. Look, I think he said a lot. He's got a lot to show for the last week in terms of his leadership. You know, a lot of people argued in the wake of the Afghan debacle that we were done, that a leader without followers is just a guy out for a walk. And basically I know many people said we would never lead again. Our credibility was fatally damaged. But I think the last week or so has demonstrated that in effect, Biden could lead. He could marshal NATO, the EU, summon up a sanctions package, which is pretty impressive, maybe too impressive, given the fact that Putin may well describe this as an act of war and respond accordingly. And that's a serious problem, I think, for us and for people who live here. If he turns his cyber tigers loose on American infrastructure or the financial markets. Some former agency analysts literally said we should all change our passwords. We ought to do that anyway, I guess.
I would rather die.
Right.
I can't. That's not the kind of freedom and liberty that there's so many passwords. It sounds very daunting. It's exhausting to even imagine. Let them take me.
Think about it. So, I think he said a lot. He's done a lot, but I think he also left out a lot. He really didn't talk about the costs that the American public might suffer as a consequence of a conflict that goes on. He didn't talk about the risks, although he alluded to it briefly, of the conflict getting out of hand, escalating to a point where Mr. Putin, I find it unlikely, but the fact that we're even talking about it is upsetting, that he would actually deploy a tactical nuclear weapon on the battlefield. And I'm not sure he explained to the public what the stakes are, clearly enough. But maybe that's for another day. I think, as I mentioned to somebody, that he's become a foreign policy crisis president.
Yeah.
And that is going to have consequences and implications for his presidency. Most of the speech was devoted, as I think we both would have expected, to domestic affairs. But even there, it seems to me, he left a lot of stuff out. Did not mention Build Back Better, though we talked about some of the issues, childcare, housing, cutting prescription drugs, that is in that package, including climate. Politico pointed out that in a 6,500-word speech, he devoted 82 words, that is to say 82 words, to the issue of voting rights, which led me to the conclusion how odd it was that a year ago, plus, Congress and the Capitol was besieged and American institutions violated, and that this, frankly, in my judgment, far more important than Ukraine or Putin, is the real challenge the Republic faces.
Right.
Can we have effective self-governance? So, I think presidential rhetoric rarely persuades. In 2 days, no one will be focused on this speech and will be on to something else. It's interesting. You get I guess presidents have two presidencies, right? The one that they expect and the one that they actually get. And the gap between those two has appeared incredibly dramatically in Mr. Putin's invasion of Ukraine. The downside, I think, is clear. You remember Bush 41 and the dramatic victory over Saddam Hussein in Desert Storm.
Yeah.
Bush lost to Clinton, despite the dramatic nature of that victory at minimal cost. It didn't pay domestic dividends. Now you have a conflict in which, fortunately, American troops are not involved, but a very long slog that is unlikely to end in a dramatic way. That is to say, either Ukraine's resistance will push the Russians out or Putin will be overthrown as a consequence of his own overreach at home. Unlikely that either of those outcomes are going to be the case. I think we're in for months, if not years, of the long slog. And the long slog is not, what Americans expect from their presidents. They want conclusions.
Right.
And I'm thinking about, since World War II, what was the last American military conflict that was kind to an American president?
Can't
think of one.
Well, somehow Bush was reelected in 2004, but
right.
That's not because Iraq was kind to him. At that point, he was in real trouble, but because the way that they destroyed John Kerry's service. But let's not get into it. So are you surprised by any of the reactions around the world, from anywhere from private companies to the Department of Justice to the reaction of the world's banks, much less certain countries, now wanting to apply? Finland, I think, talking about going to NATO. Are you surprised by anything?
Yeah, frankly. I mean, in your own personal life, let alone diplomacy, there really are very few transformative moments. I'm still debating in my own head whether this constitutes a fundamental transformation, i.e., the world will never be the same again. I remember thinking, and now that we're 2.5 years into COVID, that COVID was the greatest planet-altering event since the end of the Second World War. I remember thinking it would fundamentally alter everything. And the truth is, as we lived it, it altered, undermined, and broke a hell of a lot. But now that we appear to be on the other side of it, I'm thinking and wondering, what did COVID, what did it really alter? I mean, and I'm not sure I can come to a definitive conclusion.
I would say, I was just talking about this with, I think, Christine Romans, CNN chief business correspondent and anchor, and we were just talking about this very issue. And I think that you could argue that it planted a lot of seeds that grew faster than they wouldn't have grown without it, that we adapted to it to some extent. Those of us that obviously survived it, even with all the millions of Americans, over 1 million Americans lost. There's these adaptations, there's these lifestyle changes, there's these choices, obviously wage increases and people having more choice in terms of the jobs that they can take. I feel like there's a lot of growth. I want to be positive about something.
Yeah, and I think there are a lot of positives here in terms of priorities and how people budget and analyze their time and what time means and how precious it is. All of that, I think, is to the good. I'm just thinking in terms of real transformations. Fundamentally, I'm looking out my window. We're living on the Maryland District line here. It's a bright, sunny day in the nation's capital. I often have these thoughts. 950,000 people died, which is in itself terrible, given the fact that in the great influenza of 1918, 675,000 Americans perished. 50 million people, they estimate, around the world. And scientists then couldn't even see the virus. With all of our public health improvements, the vaccines, the antivirals, we still lost and probably will lose over 1 million people.
Yeah.
But I think we're talking 950,000.
Yeah, and those counts are low. They always have been.
That is horrible. And we could have done a lot better.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe in a decentralized society, anti-authority strains that has characterized the American Republic from the beginning. It's not for nothing we don't have a sensible policy on gun control.
Right.
And it's not for nothing we don't have a comprehensive policy on healthcare yet. There's a strain that runs through American history, which is we push back against comprehensive, definitive, systemic solutions to problems. We declare war on them, right? War on drugs, war on mental illness, war on crime, war on poverty, war on terror. But these wars never end. I mean, we continue to combat them. So, there is that. So is what Putin has done, will it fundamentally transform the nature of foreign policy? I just don't. I mean, there's so many wild cards. The Ukrainian resistance, the internal Russian dynamic, the impact of sanctions. That I'm not ready to say yet. Like Dorothy said to Toto, we're not in Kansas anymore. I don't want to trivialize this at all, but I'm second guessing myself because it's the breathlessness of humans interpreting these events that needs to be put into context with some measure of perspective. Sorry to drone on.
No, I think that very last point is so important for everybody to listen as we watch this day to day, as there's more resources, there's cameras in everybody's pocket to capture it. And as you don't know if this video was taken this year or today or last year or 5 years ago, you don't even know if it's from this conflict. It's hard for journalists to bear out what's happening. There's the propaganda war. And so when we take it hour by hour, day by day, it's really not doing anybody any good that is viewing it, probably, is what you're saying. And maybe we should cool our jets on the analysis of it, because anything can happen, as anything is happening. You're seeing Ukrainian people fight. And why did Putin not expect that?
Again, given his past pattern of behavior, which is incremental, risk-averse moves in Georgia, in 2008, in Crimea, in the Donbass, in Syria, where he put minimum assets and received maximum gains.
Right.
I mean, I'm not a psychiatrist and I'm not a Russian expert, but I would argue this is out of his, forget out of character, it's out of the sort of tactical and strategic conception of the way he behaved. My sense is that when people are angry and aggrieved and fundamentally focused on their own sense of humiliation, they end up creating a whole new world that they become trapped by.
Right.
And the only thing that I can conclude is that there is an emotional factor here in his response that led him to ignore, assuming there were intelligence estimates. And this is where, the fact that the Russians bogged down in the first 5 or 6 days suggested to one analyst that he had given his military very little notice of his plans to do this sort of comprehensive campaign, and they were scrambling. So I don't know. But again, 6 days into this, I think we have to be very sober about, where we are in this. Someone said it's going to get worse before it gets worse.
What about the comments you're hearing? I think it was a Republican senator said this the other day. Maybe it was Rob Portman. And others are talking about that this is a unifying event like nothing else. People are arguing, even 9/11. Are you surprised by that? Do you agree with that? That's what you're seeing? And if so, are you surprised?
Well, last night I kind of closed my eyes and imagined what you had a degree of bipartisan applause on more than one issue, which I found to be striking. The Republicans, by and large, other than the sort of radical right, have fallen in line behind the president for now. And I think political elites in Washington, I found last night's, other than the outburst on the issue by what's her name from Colorado,
Lauren Boebert.
And Marjorie Taylor Greene's sort of, I got to get in on the act, which was so awful. I mean, Biden talked about, flag draped coffins as a consequence of Americans not dying in combat, but from burn pits and from cancer, in reference to his son, Beau. And, she blurts out You put 13 in, which was a reference to the 13 Americans that were killed in Kabul at the airfield, the airport.
Yeah.
I found it pretty uplifting, actually. But it's momentary, right? I mean, the Europeans, NATO, the Ukrainians, everybody's unified for now. And you don't have to scratch much below the surface to find that we are not.
You're still most worried about what's happening here domestically in terms of the dwindling of our democracy and the fact that Trump is still the leader of the Republican Party and what might happen in terms of that. Is that what you mean?
Yes, I'm worried about what's happening in too many states in terms of legislation introduced to change the way votes are counted and how blocking people's capacity to vote. I'm concerned that the Republican Party has still become a kind of amen chorus for Donald Trump. And one of our two major parties, that's the problem in a two-party system. When one of the parties is committed seemingly to attaining power by undermining the very institutions and the Constitution that is designed to protect transfer of authority and expansion of voting rights, then you've got to really wonder. I mean, I'm not persuaded about all the rabbit holes, and I don't mean to trivialize the arguments of many very thoughtful political scientists and journalists who are very worried about coup d'etats, civil wars. I'm not sure I'm prepared to go there yet, but many people are. And that to me is very, very worrisome. You know, my own view is we've seen the enemy, Pete, and it's us.
Yeah.
And I only mean that in terms of our divisions and the various tribes that we've broken ourselves into.
Yeah, but even if you could get past somehow agreeing in free and fair elections and get rid of the interference and all the opposition Republicans put in the way, then you wanted to get to some kind of policy discussion. You realize they don't have a policy or platform. They have personalities, and they have, on the side of a bus, the babies, guns, and Jesus or something. I mean, like it's not really a policy conversation. And far too many of them believe in ridiculous conspiracy theories. Always have, I've been arguing, but now far too many more. So it's an information battle. And luckily we get to talk with someone like you, but they're going to listen to Alex Jones scream about this for 3 or 4 minutes. He's a better performer. He's a better performer than you are, I'd say.
Yeah, for sure. It is interesting that one of the 4 policies the president laid out yesterday that would unify the country, one was beating opioids. The second was dealing with vets. The third was social media. And I think the fourth was war on cancer.
Right.
This is a huge problem. I mean, my kids tell me, I fall farther and farther behind or further and further behind every day in terms of my facility and capacity to understand and use all of this stuff. And it can be a force for good. But I don't see how, if the Rand Corporation calls it truth decay, but we're so far beyond truth decay. I mean, the teeth of critical thinking and Americans looking at empirical reality the same way, they're basically all falling out. It's not truth decay anymore. The teeth of a republic that needs to look at reality, in essence, in the same way, that's being undermined. And I don't see how you have effective self-government when millions of Americans disagree on basic realities. How can you have effective self-government? Because it opens the door to somebody, a he or a she, riding in on a white horse or a black horse to basically define what truth is. And too many people believe. So I don't know what to do.
Well, I would say you should consider upgrading some of the technology to join us here. As I look around your room, I see a record player, a lit candle, a quill and ink well, and there seems to be a person churning butter in the background,
right,
sir.
Exactly, right. Somebody's making milk in the background. I could use an upgrade. I'd definitely say that's That's definitely
No, well,
the case.
we're glad. I want you to stay right where you are because you're deep thinking about all of these things, and your ability to analyze it in the moment, given your historical perspective, is of great value to us. And you can't replace that with an app or a screaming monster on some YouTube channel.
Let's hope. Well, I would forget me. Let's hope not. I mean, I'm sure I want to be around when a computer has the capacity to write Macbeth or something like it. Humans are very important in this world.
Well, I guess now is not the best time to introduce my new droid girlfriend, Rebecca. Hey, no.
You know, I can understand why you've remained such a resilient force in the media. No, I'm serious. You know, I say this all the time, but you have this way of conducting conversations which provide space and time, injecting your own laser-like inquiries, particularly when you're unhappy with somebody's response, but you're always positive. And that's really important.
I really appreciate that observation. It means a lot to me, and it always means a lot to me when we talk. Anything else you want to say in closing about either State of the Union, Russia, Ukraine, China, Taiwan, Iran? The Iran deal, by the way, is moving forward. The IPCC's got a new assessment out on climate. Anything else, sir?
No, I would only conclude with the immortal words of somebody who said, think positive and test negative.
Thank you very much, sir.
All right, Pete, it's a pleasure. Take care.
All right, there he goes, Aaron David Miller. You got to go thank him. You got to thank him for joining me. Please do at Aaron D. Miller 2, at Aaron D. Miller 2. Check out at Carnegie Endow 2, the Carnegie Endowment. His talk with Ken Burns sounds really great, and I hope you appreciated that conversation with Aaron David Miller as much as I did. All right, well, that's what I've got for you here on the Thursday show. I hope to see you tonight at the Hangout at 8 Eastern. Always a bright spot for my week. Always fills my cup back up to see you, to connect with you. And if you're not already a subscriber and haven't experienced those Hangouts, you ought to come by. You really ought to come by. We love meeting new people. It was great to meet Mike Green last week and hung out and told us about himself and his work, and I just love it. We all love it. We love you guys when you stop by. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to stop by. You can just support the podcast. I appreciate it. StandUpWithPete.com. StandUpWithPete.com. I'll talk to you tomorrow right here on the show. Bye-bye.
They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense and you stand up. Stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up. Stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you